Councillor Vera Waters, Walsall Council.
Councillor Martin McCarthy, Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council, representing Castle Bromwich.
And Andrew Burrow from Solihull Borough Council, representing Meriden Ward, which is a lot closer to Coventry than it is Solihull.
I'm Councillor Naeem Akhtar from Coventry City Council.
Councillor Cathy Basin, I'm the ABCA representative from Dudley Council.
Hi, Lindsay Roberts, Scrutiny Officer for the Combined Authority.
And I'm Dan Essex, I'm the Governance Services Manager for the Combined Authority.
Hello, I'm Kate Taylor, I'm the Head of Finance, Business Partnering and Strategic Planning for the Combined Authority and one of the Deputy Section 151 officers.
Hi, I'm Councillor Jamie Tennant, representing Wheeling Celiac Ward on Birmingham City Council.
I'm Councillor Laura Rainbow from Birmingham City Council, representing Quinton Ward.
Hi, I'm Amanda Tomlinson, day job Chief Executive of Black Country Housing Group, representing Black Country Lake.
Morning, my name is Khurram Mahmood and I'm representing the Young Combined Authority.
Hi, I'm Ed Cox, I'm Director for Strategy, Integration and Net Zero here at the WMCA.
And finally, I'm Councillor Mike Sutherland from Cannock Chase District Council.
Okay, thanks everybody for that, because as I say, there are a number of new faces. So if we move on to the agenda, you'll see, just to note that the appointment of the chair was made by the CA board at its meeting on the 10th of June, and that's myself for a second year. So that's just for noting. We'll now take apologies for absence, and I've got apologies from Lindsay.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillors Sims, Sweet and Ward.
Can I just ask, and I think I've met a few of you on Teams prior to today's meeting, if you're not able to attend a meeting, please try and get your substitute to attend. We core it today, which is great, and we want to maintain that quorum all the way through the year, because otherwise we're not able to do the business of the scrutiny board. Okay, so we move then swiftly on to declarations of interest. Any declarations? Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask that it be recorded that I can't see any particular pecuniary interest with my role as Chief Executive Black Country Housing Group, but if you can just take note of that, please. And also I'm a Governor of Wolverhampton College. Thank you.
Do I have any other declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. And then we move on to the appointment of Vice Chair, and I'm going to hand over to Dan to just explain the process.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as you saw at the start of the agenda, the Combined Authority Board makes the appointment of the Chair for this committee, and that was Councillor Bain for the next 12 months. It is within the gift of this committee, though, to appoint its Vice Chair. So I will ask for nominations for Vice Chair. I do need to draw to members' attention that one of the requirements on the regulations that govern the Combined Authority is that the Chair or Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Committee cannot be a member of the same party as the Mayor. So in that instance, obviously, Andy Struthers, our Mayor, is Conservative, so we can't have a Conservative member of the Scrutiny Committee who's chairing or vice chairing. That applies to all combined authorities. So can I therefore have a nomination from a non-Conservative member of the committee, please?
Okay, so can I nominate Councillor Akhtar, please?
Okay, thank you. Is that seconded?
I'll second it.
So the Vice Chair member isn't a member of the committee, so you're not entitled to vote, but I saw a hand at the back. Councillor Lundby, yeah, thank you. Is that seconded? Okay, are there any other nominations for Vice Chair? Seeing those, all those in favour for Councillor to be Vice Chair? Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you for Vice Chair for
Okay.
the year. Okay, so now we move on to the next appointment, and that's to appoint the Chair of Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee for the coming year. And in exactly the same way as the chair of overview and scrutiny has to be the opposing party to the mayor, so does the chair of transport scrutiny. So can I see nominations for transport scrutiny?
Can I propose you, Chair, to be chair of scrutiny? Transport scrutiny?
Do I have any other nominations for chair of transport scrutiny? Dan, do you just want to explain why we take the chair from here and not from the scrutiny committee itself?
Yeah, so when Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee was set up, it's the suggestions within the name that it's the subcommittee of this committee. And so under the arrangements that were agreed at the time it was set up, it was agreed that the chair of that subcommittee would be appointed by this committee, and that chair would attend these meetings and report back. So members who were on this committee last year may remember Councillor Clements from Birmingham, who's no longer involved in transport scrutiny, that she chaired that meeting and attended this meeting to report back. So it's to ensure that there's that close link between the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee, which looks at all things transport, and then this committee that looks at all other matters relating to the Combined Authority.
Could I say that the same rules apply about
Absolutely. So that those political rules that I explained, it's across all scrutiny meetings. So it's this committee and transport scrutiny as well in lives.
Okay, thank you. So do I have any other Labour nominations for chair of transport scrutiny? No. So can I have a seconder then for myself as chair of transport scrutiny?
No, I'm going to do it, don't you?
Thank you. Okay, so we move on then to chair's remarks. As I said at the beginning, I'd like to welcome everybody to the committee. We've got some new members, which, you know, it's quite a hefty work programme, and I think if you haven't been familiar with the CA before, it can take a couple of meetings to get your head around the structures and get used to things within the committee. But hopefully, you know, people will feel able to contribute from day one. And I think the way I like to chair meetings is that everybody has an equal opportunity to contribute to the meeting. We have lost some very experienced members this year, so you know I would like to place on record my thanks to members of the committee who contributed an awful lot to this committee, particularly over the years. With particular note to Councillor Trickett, who was chair and vice chair since I think probably 2018. So losing Lisa's experience is, you know, she had brought a lot of valuable experience to it. I'd like to welcome her colleagues from Birmingham, who I'm sure will have plenty of experience and plenty of knowledge to contribute as well. So thank you. Hi Ian, have a seat.
Apologies for being late.
That's all right. So I think the focus of scrutiny has always been really are the policies and the actions and the investments of the Combined Authority benefiting all of the communities in the West Midlands, and particularly are they benefiting those that have been hardest to reach. And I think that from our scrutiny perspective of keeping that in mind when we're looking at investments, when we're looking at policies, particularly in the policy Q&A with the Mayor, that's really important to keep that at the back of your mind when we're formulating our questions. So to move on then, we will take the minutes of the 7th of March. Now, there aren't many of us here who would remember the 7th of March, so I'm reliant on a small number.
Yeah.
But check this out, I was there, Chair.
You were?
I was there, yeah.
Now, I think most of the things actually appear on the agenda today. So, but in terms of accuracy, if I can take page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we accept that they're an accurate an accurate recollection of that meeting. Lovely.
I'll move those, Chair.
Thank you very much. In terms of matters arising, as I've said, most of these are picked up on the agenda itself. So unless anybody's got any burning issues from the minutes, I think probably any questions you have are probably best raised on the agenda itself. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I do want to draw to people's attention is on page 3, and it's number 56. So we had the scrutiny review, which was helping to deliver affordable and social housing, which was conducted by Councillor Trickett. It was a verbal report on the day and a verbal report taken to CA board, all of which, all the recommendations were accepted by the board. If it would help, I can run through the recommendations very quickly. Yeah, shall I just run through those?
Yes,
So that the CA board writes to the Secretary of State for DLUHC, setting out the region's ambitions to deliver a step change in the delivery of social and affordable homes in the region, and its intent to pursue this through the levelling up agenda and trailblazer devolution deal. So we'll pick up more on that as we move into the next agenda item. Recommendation 2, that the CA should maintain the minimum affordable housing target, that the affordable housing requirements for schemes funded by the CA, currently set at 20%, should seek to be aligned with the targets set by local planning authorities in the relevant local plan, including the alignment of type and tenure. That the CA and local authorities continue to work together through the Housing and Land Board, CA Public Land Task Force, and liaise directly with Cabinet Office to address issues around best value in the disposal of public land, to identify actions and interventions that will maximise the wider social, economic and environmental benefits secured. Recommendation 4, that the CA, housing associations, Homes England and local authorities continue to work together to address the contradictions and challenges of the current system for delivery of affordable and social housing, recognising that the challenge cannot be addressed in isolation. It's multifaceted, systemic issue where all agencies need to work together with a clear strategy for change. Recommendation 5, that the CA, local authorities, other regional stakeholders campaign for an end to the restrictions cited in the interviews of social housing grant being awarded to areas of high affordability pressure, noting more investment in social housing across the region will address multiple need and provide more secure, healthy and efficient homes. Recommendation 6, through the trailblazer devolution deal, the CA, local authorities and other stakeholders campaign for an end to or amendment of the viability clause in national planning policy, which is impacting directly on land prices and affordable housing supply in the region. Recommendation 7, that the CA brings together local capacity, capabilities and expertise across local authorities, the CA and other public bodies in matters around land assembly and interventions such as CPOs. Recommendation 8, that through the trailblazer devolution deal, the CA, local authorities and other regional stakeholders campaign for a review of the local housing allowance system and the necessary local discretion in order to address issues affecting excluded residents and the subsequent impact on homelessness, temporary accommodation and the private rented sector. Now, those recommendations were all agreed at the board meeting on the 18th of March, and we have an update coming back to this committee on progress in September. One of the things that we're keen to ensure that we do is where we make recommendations to board and board accept them, that we do keep it on our agenda to make sure we have updates so we know the impact that our recommendations have made. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Okay, and then that moves us on to update on the trailblazer devolution deal. So if I hand over to you, Ed, and then I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Councillor Baton, and good to meet new members of this committee. I thought it might be worth just saying a couple of words at the beginning about the Trailblazer devolution deal generally, rather than just update, though I have got a few things, and there's a paper which I'm assuming people have read around the update. But for those that are unfamiliar with this term, Trailblazer devolution deal, it comes from the Levelling Up white paper, which was published by government in February. And it's a very extensive document, 330 odd pages, addressing many issues across government. But one of the most important things for us as a combined authority is that it identifies the West Midlands and Greater Manchester as the two mayoral combined authorities that have been making the greatest progress in relation to devolution and in relation to how we can level up in our regions. And so it proposes that we have what they describe as trailblazer status. In other words, we can negotiate a new devolution deal. So for the West Midlands, that'll be our third devolution deal. And that, as one minister put it, nothing should be off the table. So that there are many different ways in which we might say to government, we can do more to level up our region if you give us particular powers and responsibilities. Government was also quite clear that after the most recent comprehensive spending review, there wasn't any new money on the table, so to speak, but there was scope for looking at some aspects of what they described as fiscal devolution, and also the possibility of using funds that have already been committed in different ways in order to give us more control over those funds. So we have begun, we've now been working for several months on a process by which we might pull together a set of proposals for government around a new devolution deal. Initially, we scoped out about 20 different work streams where we might come up with proposals, and some of those are listed in, I think probably the easiest section to look at here is 3.1. I'm happy to go through any of those if people want to, but I don't want to read out a long list of policy areas because I don't think that's a great use of our time this morning. So that's all by way of background. Again, happy to answer any questions on the background, but then just to give you an update as set out in this note, one of the things that we've been very committed to throughout is to fully involve our constituent and non-constituent authorities. And it was suggested that we should have a round of meetings with constituent authority leaders and chief executives, which we've done. And that's been very helpful in clarifying precisely what local authorities are hoping to get from a new devolution process. As I've said already, we've been developing proposals against 20 different work streams, and they are now at a point where in most of those workstream areas we have fairly straightforward proposals, and those proposals are following a process by which they are going to senior local authority officers, local authority chief execs, finance directors, and then to the mayor and portfolio leaders liaison group for informal discussion. As we work through that process, we're then able, I think, to put some of those ideas on the table with government officials. But it's important to say that there's been no formal negotiation process yet started in relation to at a political level between leaders and government ministers. Shall I pause, Councillor, if you want to jump in?
Sorry,
Yeah, go on.
I've got a very simple question, if I may, Chair. You talked about authorities and meetings with chief execs, etc., and chiefs. Does that include non-constituent?
It does indeed.
It does include us. Okay. So I don't always get a term through my boss. He doesn't always tell me what he's doing.
So there are representatives of the non-constituent authorities at both what we call it the senior local authority officers group and the devolution strategy group, which is the chief execs. So yes, is the answer to that. And indeed, I've done at least 2 presentations for the non-constituent authorities immediately after board meetings as well. And I should say that in terms of all these different work streams, we're trying to involve non-constituent authorities in the work stream conversations too. So hopefully there's been plenty of opportunity for non-cons to be involved in that process. And then just to continue, government engagement has been quite slow for a range of reasons, not just those that we saw last week, but I think throughout the process, it seems as though the Department for Levelling Up has had a number of things it's been juggling. So another of the proposals within the Levelling Up white paper is to bring forward new combined authorities. So I think a lot of DLUC officer time has gone into that process rather than focusing on the trailblazer devolution deals. And then next item on our agenda is the Levelling Up and Regeneration bill, and so a lot of officer time's gone into that bill as well. So we haven't made as much progress, I don't think, with the negotiation of the trailblazer devolution deal as we had hoped to start off with, but that's largely been on the government side rather than on our side. In actual fact, I think that's been a benefit because it's meant that we've been able to take longer both to develop our proposals, but also to make sure that a wide range of stakeholders, including yourselves, are sort of involved in that discussion process. We do this week have our first round of officer level negotiation meetings, where we'll be looking at, we have separate negotiations on housing, and I can reassure you, members of this committee, that some of the issues to do with affordable housing that Councillor Baton's just talked about will be on the table as we have those negotiations on Wednesday. Skills, transport and funding simplification are the 4 topics that we'll be negotiating about on Wednesday. So that's starting to happen. And I should probably give a kind of real-time update, which isn't in this paper, which is to say that the new, I think he's describing himself as caretaker Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Greg Clark, has said that he sees no reason why we shouldn't progress with the devolution negotiations, notwithstanding the situation in government at the moment, which is why the negotiation meetings on Wednesday are going ahead and why we are continuing to have conversations with officials on the assumption that we are still aiming towards an autumn fiscal event for an agreement on a devolution deal. I think the last thing to say is that there's some work now that we're beginning to bring the whole thing together. I know a lot of people have been saying, all very well having lots and lots and lots and lots of different proposals, but does it all come together somewhere? So the answer is yes, it does, and we're starting to work on what we're describing as a West Midlands Levelling Up prospectus, where we will set out all of our proposals in one place. The intention is to have that ready through August, so that's ready at the beginning of September, and that, if you like, is our kind of formal position as a region, whereby all of our proposals will be set out. And then the other thing that we're doing that brings things together is developing what we're describing as a West Midlands outcomes framework. This will bring together a series of probably between 20 and 30 indicators that will show the progress that we're making against different levelling up missions, and we'll be able to then monitor that over time. Government's very keen that we should have that kind of a framework in place so that, first of all, they can hold us to account for any agreement that they make with us, but also so that the public can hold us account as a combined authority for the progress we're making as well. Because again, one of the key issues within the Levelling Up white paper is that they want mayors to be seen to be more accountable for the new powers, the new funding that they might receive directly with the general public. So I'll just pause there, and I'm very happy to answer any questions on this.
Thanks, Ed. So I'll throw it open to questions, and I've had Vera indicating she'd like to ask.
Did I hear correctly? You said there's 20 different indicators. And if so, can you tell us what the indicators actually are, please?
Yeah, we are working on, I said, between 20 and 30. At the moment, there's anything up to about 120 that we could look at. So we're narrowing that down, and I'll commit to sharing with this committee the full framework once we get a little bit closer to that being agreed. There are 8 different themes that we're looking at, which are based around the combined authorities inclusive growth framework. So they're very much focused on things like equalities, climate change, economic opportunity, connectivity, connected communities, that kind of thing. So there's 8 that we're working on at the moment, but I'm very happy to share those.
So there's actually only 8 actually, but the other indicators are actually linked in with the 20 to 30, and you are going to narrow that down, because I think it's going to take far too long. If you've got that many indicators, you've got to go through to get to the end result.
No, you're absolutely right. I think this is a really, really challenging task, because if we were to just go with 1 or 2, people would say that doesn't paint a comprehensive picture of the region. You know, things like gross disposable household income, for example, is a really, really important one. But if we only focused on that and didn't look at, for example, educational attainment, then you could say, well, we're not looking at a whole set. We're not looking at how we're reducing carbon. Then again, we're overlooking those key issues. If we're not looking at, I don't know, for example, access to childcare, you know, people might say, well, that's not an inclusive region either. So you can see the challenge that we've got in terms of how do you get a set of indicators that we think best describes our progress against how we're levelling up the region. So what we've done, as I say, is we've identified 8 themes, and for each theme, we are trying to narrow it down to 3, no more than 3 indicators. That would make 24. But there's a little bit of discussion as to whether we should perhaps do 4 per theme, which would take us to 32, or whether we actually go down to 2, which is why I'm saying between 20 and 30 at the moment. But I really do appreciate the challenge that there is there. The other thing that we're committed to doing is to publishing. At the moment, there's a report called State of the Region report that's been published for the last few years. That's quite a dense document with far more than 20 to 30 indicators in it. So we're trying to say we want to produce something that's a lot more simple, that people can just access more easily, that tells a more credible story about our progression.
I'll bring you in a minute, Martin. So I've got Councillor Akhtar, Councillor Lumby, and then I'll bring yourself in, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ed, for the presentation. Can you tell us a bit more about the powers you're talking about? Sorry, can you hear me now?
I missed the word that you said.
The power you're seeking to get more power from the Whitehall to the West Midlands. Can you tell us a bit more about what power you're seeking from the government? Because the last thing I would like to see is the 2-tier local government in our region, because the Combined Authority was set up to bring investment, fix the transport, and upskill the region, not for the other powers. Can you tell us what power you're seeking from the government?
So the list is in 3.1, where we spell out those different types of devolution that we're discussing with government. So if I just quickly run through those, it might be helpful. I don't want to. Under each category, there are probably 5 or 6 different things. So altogether, I think we've probably got, I don't know, 40, 50 different. When I say powers, there's flexibilities, there's different ways in which we want to use funding differently. So there isn't a kind of single thing that we're asking for under any given one. But under transport, let me start that. There are 3 areas where we think we can go further and faster. So that's transport, skills, and housing. So under transport, let me give you an example. We're looking to be able to do some more experimentation around the notion of mobility credits, which at the moment we've only been able to use in relatively limited ways in Coventry, but we want to be able to do that more broadly across the whole of the West Midlands. Just one example. On skills and employment support, we want now to have a greater ability to co-commission employment support with DWP. So at the moment, Job Centre Plus does that without any reference to local businesses, to what we're trying to do in our local economies. So we want to be able to co-commission that with DWP. On housing, Councillor Baton has just highlighted a number of areas around affordable housing where we would like greater flexibility around, for example, the LHA rate. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about there. I won't give you an example of all of them, but in section 2, funding simplification, this is about, instead of government giving us lots and lots and lots of pots of, say, retrofit funding, we would like all of those funding pots to be put together into a single pot with a commitment over 5 years, which means that we'll be able to unlock that retrofit market in a way that we can't at the moment, because businesses are saying, why would we commit to this when you've only got £5 million to spend on it, as opposed to £500 million to spend on it over a 5-year period. There's things about business rates retention and fiscal devolution that are really important, that we've yet to agree all the details of those fiscal devolution proposals. And then there's a whole set of things around how we address the economic challenges that we're facing at the moment. So extending the business and tourism programme that West Midlands Growth Company have got for an additional period of time, doing more on industrial decarbonisation so that we can support businesses with energy costs at the moment. At the moment, they can't, for example, have much influence over the way in which energy infrastructure providers are creating grid connections, and 70% of the costs that businesses face are due to the cost of grid connections. So we want more control over that process. Innovation and digital infrastructure. Again, in parts of the Black Country, we need to be able to encourage BD UK, who are the people that provide access to fibre broadband, to be investing perhaps along our metro routes to open up some of the cold spots we've got around that. And then finally, in terms of sort of wider public services issues and pride in place issues, we've got some proposals that we're working on with our directors of public health around health devolution, whereby we might look at, I don't know, a single patient care record for the whole of the West Midlands, so we can do better on linking up health. On culture, we're proposing a cultural legacy fund to follow up from the Commonwealth Games and Coventry City of Culture. Stuff on digital inclusion, homelessness prevention, particularly tackling some of the issues around exempt accommodation, and then some ideas around crime, community safety and resilience that we're working on with the Police and Crime Commissioner. So forgive me for going through that long list, but hopefully it gives you a flavour of the kind of things that we're talking about. And I hope you can see the virtue of getting more powers for the region to do those kind of things. I need to be really clear that where we think that things should be doubly devolved, in other words, the Combined Authority makes a case that those powers are passed on to local authorities, or that funding is passed on to local authorities, we are making that case. So all of the papers that we're sending to leaders, it's very clear, there's a little section there saying, what will the local benefit be? How will we be doubly devolving to local authorities to make sure that they get the powers that they need for particularly important proposals that they want to see coming forward?
Can you come back? Yes, please. Thank you. Also in 3.2, you're talking about enforcement powers. Can you tell us a bit more what enforcement power you're seeking from the government?
I think this is in relation to investment zones. Sometimes we call them town centre investment zones, levelling up investment zones. This is to do with compulsory purchase orders. I'm not the absolute expert on exactly what that involves, but I know that we want to make it slightly easier to pursue CPOs so that we can make changes to our town centres. And I know that my colleagues in housing, regen and planning have been working with local planning officers in order to kind of work out exactly what the detail is around that proposal.
And that's what I mean. As long as we are not taking away power from the local authorities,
we've made a cast iron commitment that we will not be. I think the term that the leaders use is sucking powers up from local government. We are only drawing down powers from central government, and so in all of the papers that we're sharing with chief execs, with leaders, it does make it really, really clear that that's not the case. And we have no doubt at all that leaders and chief execs will completely call us out if there is any sense that powers are being drawn upwards.
Thanks. I'll make it clear at the end my view of where scrutiny will add value to this process. after we finish the question time. Just want to quickly welcome Laura Schofer to the meeting. Laura's the Chief Exec of the Combined Authority and obviously has a standing invitation to attend these meetings. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Apologies for being late, and welcome to all the new members who we haven't met before. We're happy that you've joined the committee.
So, Councillor Lumby, you were next.
So my question's around best outcome. Yourself and Manchester are the trailblazers. Are you actually liaising with Manchester around that? Because I appreciate Manchester doesn't start from the same baseline. Or are you expecting perhaps the government, because it may fit the government to have one size fits all to a degree because it's easier for them. But what I'd hate it to be is that when you read what you've achieved and then what they've achieved, you suddenly go, oh, we should really go for that.
It's a very good question and very well put. I think if you read the Levelling Up white paper, they talk about a menu of powers, particularly for all of the other combined authority areas, and indeed the new combined authorities that they're proposing. And they are actually sort of setting out, you can see a table in the Levelling Up white paper that says that I think they call it level 1 and level 2 and level 3 and so on. So there is an intention to try and create a level of, let's call it, standardisation around devolution deals. But what's most exciting about the West Midlands and Greater Manchester is that they've said they don't want us to be following that menu. They want us to go off menu, so to speak, and to be trailblazing. So the notion of trailblazing in this context means that we can ask for things and do things that, if you like, set a bit of a standard that others might follow at a later date. You're absolutely right, though, that in relation to Greater Manchester, it's really important that we stay close to them and understand what they're asking for. And so we've been doing that. We have weekly meetings with Greater Manchester to talk through what they're asking for and what we might ask for. In many areas where we see that there is a real opportunity for us to have the same or do the same, we are aligning our proposals with theirs. But there are occasions where we say, well, actually, Greater Manchester might want that, and we don't, or vice versa. And there are, as I think you recognised, sort of different starting points on some of this. So there's an element in which, on some areas, we might be doing a little bit of catch up with Greater Manchester, but in other areas, we're just doing things differently because we think it's right to do things differently, and doing things better where we think we can actually do things better. So there's a lot of alignment, but we are still leaving some scope for us to do things slightly differently.
Councillor MacArthur.
Yes. My question is mainly about communication. As we go through this, there'll be an escalating level of public interest. It will be presented by the media in one way or another. When I came onto this committee, one of the first things that I did was to look up some of the key documents on the scope and the activity of the board, and these were either not available or one or two of them out of date. Can we make much more of an effort, particularly as part of the communications agenda, to ensure that our external websites have as much current information as possible?
Yeah, very happy to do that. So I think you're right, but let me just explain what we have done and what we can do, and possibly let's have a conversation about what's the best thing to do. So we published a briefing at the beginning of the process, I think in March, that was very clearly in the public domain, and so that sort of set out, that sort of fired the starting gun to some extent on this. And since then we have put reports to boards and to overview and scrutiny, which also go into the public domain as well. And so this update report, for example, is there for all to see. I think we've been slightly nervous to say too much in public until we get into these kind of negotiations that we're getting into now. I think for two reasons. One, we are uncertain as to exactly what might be achieved, and I think to raise public expectations about a process which is still uncertain could be a hostage to fortune. So I think we've been a little bit cautious not to put too much out there until we're clearer. And then I also think that, and we've seen this in previous rounds of devolution negotiations with the different combined authorities, that we don't necessarily want to show our hand too much in terms of what we want to say to government as well. So there's been a little bit of caution, I think. But I do agree. One thing that we have tried to do is to make sure that in all of our work streams that there's been some really good stakeholder engagement with at the work stream level. So, for example, the economy proposals have been discussed with our chambers of commerce and our LEPs, and they've been playing quite a proactive role around some of that. The innovation proposals have been discussed in some detail with all our university contacts. We're working very closely with health providers around the health proposals and so on. So I think we're doing it on a thematic basis, but I hope you understand some of the reasons why we haven't put too much out there in the public domain. But if you don't think that's right, then perhaps we should review that. I certainly feel as we now move a little bit closer and we have some initial negotiation conversations, we might feel more comfortable in putting more stuff into the public domain. Last thing I'd say is that we have been doing on a weekly basis something we call week notes, which keeps everybody up to date with the devolution process. That's not a public thing per se, but anybody on this committee will be very welcome to sign up to week notes, and then you'll get a weekly update as to how we're making progress with the devolution negotiation.
Just come back. Yeah, the main concern is that sometimes it's very easy for us to get misrepresented by the media, and there's a non-communication theory. If we don't tell anything, people make up their own ideas. And this is a process of change. That we have to decide what goes on there, and that when there is something on there, that it's up to date. That's all I'd ask.
Let me give some more thought to that and see whether there's more we should be doing in that relation.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So that's something that I've been quite conscious of for a long time now, is about the public facing engagement and how we increase that at the appropriate time. I've got Councillor Tennant followed by Councillor Chalk.
I've got a couple of questions about money. So first, and this might just be because I'm new, you talked about the desire for a 5-year funding settlement. What is the current kind of funding settlement, or if it's all in those different parts, what's the average length of the funding settlement in those different parts? And the second, you said the government made quite clear no new money. However, if we are to get extra powers, is there any possibility of money that currently exists nationally with the departments in Whitehall coming down with that power? So not so much new money, but moving money nationally to locally.
Again, yeah, thank you. Excellent questions. So when I talked about the 5-year funding settlement, I was talking specifically about retrofit funding. So to answer your question specifically about that, what's happening at the moment is we're having to bid for very short-term pots of funding. So something like the home upgrade grant and the sustainable warmth competition funding. We're getting literally, well, we're actually working on as a consortium. Your local authorities are all kind of sharing information about particular housing types and particular areas of housing that you want to be retrofitted. We're pulling that together into a single funding application and making that application to government on your behalf, bringing that funding back. And typically, we're asked to then undertake those retrofit improvements within a 12-month period, in some cases within a 6-month period. And we're getting, 2 million, 3 million pounds to do that. In the scheme of things, that's absolutely tiny. And when we look at things like our skills training programme, they're struggling to get people to want to train to be retrofit assessors or retrofit installers, because the colleges are saying, well, we can't see any market in this. So why would we, when we all know that this is going to be a really, really big and important thing that we need to do? So what we're saying to government is give us a 5-year funding settlement. We've worked out that in the next 2 years, at least, we are likely to get 125 million from government in all these different competitions. So why not give us, that funding commitment up front without going through lots of competitions, and then we'll be able to say to our colleges, our supply chains and so on, please will you now work with us, because we can be guaranteeing that there will be this amount of public funding flowing, let alone the private funding that we could leverage on the back of that. So it's an example. There are 4 areas where we're saying to government, can you simplify funding? So again, our transport funding all comes in tiny amounts. Our skills funding comes in tiny amounts. I say tiny amounts, they're large amounts, but multiple funding pots. So we're saying pull those together into a single funding pot. Same with skills, same with housing, so that we ideally will have sort of 4 blocks of 5-year funding commitments, and that enables us to do a lot more with that funding than we would be able to currently. And then on your point about no new money, you're absolutely right. What we need to do is to be able to say that we have said as a matter of principle that we will not accept new responsibilities via a devolution deal unless we have adequate resources to cover those responsibilities. That's an absolute principle in all that we're negotiating at the moment. But you're quite right. I think one of the most effective ways for us to draw down new funding is to say, right, well, you want to give us a, let's call it health inequalities duty. It's one of the things we're talking about. In that case, we're going to need XYZ amount of funding, or we're going to need you to use the existing funding pots that you've got for things like smoking cessation or tackling obesity. We need much greater control of that funding if we're going to make that commitment.
Thanks for that, and I think that's really reassuring to know, because over the last 2 years we've been in such a competition, and timeframes have been so short, haven't they, to put funding bids in. It has been problematic, so hopefully this will save an awful lot of time and move us along quicker. So I've got Councillor Chalk and then Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Local authorities, once the board has made the decision of what they're going to go to the government with, is there any way in which our local authorities can back you up, if you like? I mean, can we write to the various parts of the Whitehall and get, or is that going to be not cost effective? And I've got another question, which is how do I get onto this weekly thing?
Perhaps, Chair, on the week notes thing, perhaps, or Dan, Lindsay, if we could just sort that out by email. If anybody, perhaps do it by exception, if anybody doesn't want to be on it, then we'll let Lindsay know, and we'll make sure you don't go on it. But otherwise, we can assume that all members of the new members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee go onto the list. That might be the easiest way of doing it. So just in terms of local authorities backing us up, that's a really nice and positive offer, and I'm really grateful for that. And we should think about ways of doing that more systematically. My assumption has been that through the existing governance structures that we've got, if we follow due process, that will imply the support of all the local authorities. We are actually talking to the Regional Business Council about ways in which businesses can write complimentary letters to support our negotiations, and we've actually started that process. So that's really good. I just wonder actually whether we ought to think through ways in which local authorities could perhaps put individual letters of support in around particular propositions if they particularly want to support them. So let me take that one away and have a bit more of a think about that. Thank you.
Thanks. So Councillor Fenton, and then we'll draw this item to a close.
Thank you. My question's in and around the finances in the form of competition. Can you talk a little bit about the structures and the safeguards that will be in place to ensure that we don't all have to enter competition and everybody gets their fair share of funding? Thank you.
I think that's already happening.
So, I mean, that's a really difficult question to answer in the round, if you see what I mean. I think we have to accept the fact that, well, I say we have to accept the fact. I would encourage you to think about the fact that it might be better to organise a competition if we have to organise competitions at the regional level rather than the national level. But I think we need to look at each funding stream in its own right. If I stick with retrofit funding, which I was talking about earlier, we've done that in a very coordinated, non-competitive way. We've said to all the local authorities in the region, tell us about the housing that you particularly want to be retrofitted, and let's pull that together into a coordinated approach to government. And I dare say that in most cases that is going to be possible. And I think that's generally a principle that we want to work on as a region, that we try and administer that funding strategically as opposed to competitively. But I wouldn't rule out, because I mean, if you take, I don't know, Community Renewal Fund recently, that was allocated to us, but we were told we had to run a competition. So, you know, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that we might have to do competitive bidding in the future around certain pots of funding. But I think as a principle, if we're going to say that we want to avoid it nationally, then as a principle, we should probably say we want to avoid it at the regional level as well.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much for the questions, everyone. And it's reassuring, I think, to hear that you're not anticipating any government delay with the caretaker current arrangements, but you're not anticipating any delay in the ability to get this through for the autumn budget. So that hopefully, Laura's going, but we like to be optimistic. Laura, is there any comment you wish to make?
No, I mean, we will do everything within our control, would be how I would phrase that, to make sure that we continue to push forward. And then we'll deal with the things that are slightly outside of our control. But I think that the mayor's had some initial conversations with the new minister, and they remain to continue on, which Ed might have already said in the beginning. So apologies if I'm repeating it. But just that it's still really hugely exciting. And this suite that's been pulled together by the team, I think we don't expect to win everything, the argument on everything straight away, but it will give us a really good basis to continue to evolve and to push for devolution along the principles that Ed talked about, which is bringing powers and funding down from central government, not up. That it's about making a difference to people and to people's lives, and being able to measure and evaluate that in a systematic way, which will be really helpful to us. And just not to underestimate how excellent it is that in the short period of time that we've had a combined authority, we've moved up into the same status as Greater Manchester, which is a really good testament to the past 6 years and the work that's been done in the combined authority to be seen at that par. Because certainly not every combined authority is there, so it's a good result.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and I'd like to echo that, and hopefully, you know, these new powers will, from our point of view, the oversight of making sure that they reach the communities that need it to benefit within our region is critical. So just the role of scrutiny as we move forward in this, because as Ed's outlined, there's a process that they're going through in terms of local authority officers, finance directors, mayor and Met leaders, and the conversations with government. What would probably normally happen is that a report would come back to us either just before it goes to board in September or just after. But given the scope of the work and the extent of the importance of this particular document, my view from the scrutiny perspective was actually it would be really helpful for us over the summer period is as of being led by officers dependent on their work, how they're progressing with their work, is for us to take things in bite-sized chunks. So to have a look at the themes that are worked up and do that via a working group. For those of you who've been on the committee before, we've done deep dives where we've had small working groups that are fed back into the main committee. And I see that this could actually add some pre-decision scrutiny value to this particular piece of work, so that our comments have been received before it goes to board, which then should negate any risk of a calling at the last stage, which would be, you know, delays things possibly for the progress. So what my proposal is over the sort of between now and early September is that we'll be guided by officers. Officers will let us know when they have a number of work streams ready to start to look at. Lindsay and I will come out to members to see people's availability. In the past, we've had a static working group who've looked at things, but given the fact it's the summer holidays, given the fact there's going to be quite a number of things to look at in a short period of time, I expect there to be a number of different people sitting on these working groups. So we'll come out, see what people's availability is. It can be done by a hybrid arrangement if that's an issue, but that we also do need a geographical spread and also a political spread of members in those working groups if that's at all possible. So does that feel like a sensible way forward for the committee so that we don't get into the position in September of being hit by a huge document that will be very difficult to really make sense of, I think. Yeah. And from a YCA point of view, obviously your involvement is critical in this, and I don't know whether you're being involved in it separately to Scrutiny. You are. Right, okay, so Ed's saying you are, you're saying you're not, so.
Yeah, we had that, that was meant to be shown in the last board meeting on the 15th of June. So next board, we're gonna just have a discussion with the board, and then apart from that, we won't be involved from then on.
Right, okay. So I think that we'll have that discussion then away from this, because there's always the opportunity, of course, for some involvement through the working groups, although there will be a number of those, and to expect you to be available for all of them might be a bit of an ask. So, but we'll take that discussion outside after Friday's meeting. Ed?
Just to say, I think the idea of a working group is excellent. I think we already have sufficient material for at least a couple of sessions in August if people are available. So I think, Lindsay, we can get going and get those set up, and we're able to share information quite quickly on those. Just in relation to the YCA, we had a whole evening session with the YCA. We've pulled together a little video which is going to be shown at the board meeting on Friday of YCA views, and there's plenty of opportunity for the YCA to continue to influence that via this route or via their own channels.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, then we'll move on to the next somewhat related item, and it's back to yourself, Ed, on the implications of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill for the CA.
Thank you. So as I said earlier, alongside the Levelling Up White Paper, there is this Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill that was published in the Queen's Speech on the 10th of May. I need to say at the very beginning, as a bill, this is all provisional, and I'm reporting to you what the bill says, not what the West Midlands Combined Authority says. So very happy to take questions on it, but just to be clear, this is a government bill and not a Combined Authority policy document. I won't go through all the provisions, it's a very long bill. I should say that it contains significant sections on planning, and so provisions around the infrastructure levy, national development management policies and compulsory purchase orders, and I would hope that your planning officers in your respective local authorities are looking at in great detail at some of those matters. They relate mainly to local authorities and not to the combined authority. However, that's not to say there aren't important implications for all of us in relation to what government is proposing. Secondly, there are significant sections of the bill on devolution and local governance, around some of the principles of devolution, around government commitments to levelling up missions. So this is government holding itself accountable for levelling up in the country, and it makes provision for what it calls local government accountability frameworks. Our intention with the West Midlands Accountability Framework, or the West Midlands Outcomes Framework that I've talked about in our previous item, is that we get ahead of the curve on that one. So we're setting our own outcomes framework rather than having a government one imposed upon us. But that's in the bill as well. Interestingly, given conversations in the Combined Authority at the moment, there is scope for the remuneration of overview and scrutiny and audit committees. There's provisions in the bill around those issues. And then probably most importantly for this, or at least for the, if we're talking about this in the context of devolution, there are a number of provisions around what are described as consents. So to be explicit about those, if there are new members of a combined authority, or there are new local authorities that wish to become constituent members of a combined authority, then the bill makes provision for them to join simply by an agreement between the mayor and the joining authority. Similarly, you don't have to be geographically joined to the combined authority in order to join a combined authority. That's another provision in the bill. And then there's also provisions in the bill around the police and crime commissioner, which would allow police and crime commissioner powers to be transferred to the mayor with agreement between the mayor and the Secretary of State. All of this is to imply that it wouldn't involve the whole combined authority to agree these different provisions. So I think I'll leave it there and say that we don't expect that the bill will gain royal assent until May 2023. So if we stick to the timetable that we've described for the Trailblazer devolution deal, there is therefore no link between these matters and the Trailblazer devolution deal. And it's our intention to negotiate and agree the Trailblazer devolution deal ahead of these matters receiving royal assent. So I know that the two items are next to each other on the agenda. I know that I'm speaking to both of them, but again, I don't think there is a huge enthusiasm for convoluting the issues in the bill with the issues that we're trying to negotiate in relation to the Trailblazer devolution deal.
Thank you for that. Do I have any questions? Councillor McCarthy.
I note that Andy Street and Laura Shove appeared at the Public Bill Committee. Is there any link to that we can view that online? Just a bit of background.
I think there's a transcript.
Yeah.
So we can dig that out and send it round.
Thank you.
And I think actually it is, you can actually watch it as well. Yes.
Can I make a frivolous comment, Chair?
Well,
A little one. Remuneration, can we see if we get it backdated?
Yes. We'll take that in the
work with your MP.
spirit it was meant, Mike.
Work with your MP to table an amendment, I think is the.
Just so it's frivolous.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I've just got one question. So, what about, there's no mention of fire? Is that dealt with through the PCC?
Dan, I don't know if you can help me on this one. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to take that away. I am confident that if it did include fire, we would have been explicit about fire in this note. But I'm afraid I can't answer that question off the top of my head, so I'll have to go away and come back to you on that. Dan, do you know the answer to that?
Similar to Ed, I have referenced to fire, but we'll do a bit of check.
Yeah, if you could please, because I know that there are, for the same reasons as the PCC, there are nervousness about including fire within this, and I think Greater Manchester have recently had their worst fire authority inspection that they've ever had, following the fire being included in the powers of the mayor in Greater Manchester. So it would be useful to have that clarified for us, please. But I've got no other questions. Nothing from anybody else? No? Okay, thanks. Thanks for the two presentations, Ed. That's really helpful. So we'll look forward to a very active summer. Okay, so we now move on to the next item, and we've got Satish joining us online, who is the current interim head of governance for the CA. And this is to receive a verbal report on the review of governance arrangements. And because it's a new committee, I have asked Satish if he can just set the scene for a few minutes, just to explain how we've got to the point where we are now. Thank you, Satish.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Yes, we thought it would be quite useful for members just to be updated with the various bits of work that are taking place in relation to governance in the organisation. Some of the more sort of established members of the committee will know that work has been done previously in relation to governance, but I was asked when I joined last summer to do a sort of review of the governance arrangements at the CA by the Met leaders and the mayor. So we carried out a sort of review through a governance review working group, which the chair is aware about, and it came up with a number of recommendations to improve the decision-making arrangements within the CA and to streamline various processes as well. It had other recommendations to sort of engage an independent remuneration panel to look at member allowances, to look at various other sort of boards, including economic growth and transport board as well. So some work has been done in relation to that, and further work is being done at the moment. So I thought I thought it'd be just useful just to go through how far we've got with it. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of progress today, the first thing we did as part of the review was to map out the whole decision-making arrangements at the CA, which is somewhat sort of complicated and involved in a sense, but I think it's sort of quite on par to some of the other CAs as well. So you're not in any way sort of different there, but certainly there is sort of some scope for streamlining arrangements in relation to decision-making. So one of the first areas that we looked at was the whole area of economics at the CA, and we felt that it would be quite useful to streamline the arrangements in relation to that. So November 2021, we set up an economic growth board, which has been meeting on a regular basis since then. I think generally speaking, people have found that the arrangements for economic growth in the CA is much better as a result of that. We've also done some work in relation to improving the forward plan and its presentation. So members now have further information in relation to decision making in the CA and notice in relation to that. The quality of quality of reports for a board, CA board, has improved as well. They're much shorter now. So we have a sort of framework which says that we should have a report which is, if it's comprehensive, within sort of 6 pages. If it's sort of not comprehensive, it has attachment, then it should be 4 pages, and that's worked really well. Briefing of individual members at board has improved as well. So generally speaking, I think the sort of just the arrangements at board just feels better, more streamlined and more effective. Certainly some more work to do in terms of what type of decisions come to CA board and the arrangements for engagement prior to that, but certainly much better than it was previously. We've also just gone out to advert for a head of governance, to which the post is to continue the process of streamlining within the CA. And so hopefully during the summer months, we'll have somebody in place to be able to sort of take that work forward. And in the meantime, we are continuing to do some engagement work with the Met authorities in particular, some further work to do with the non-cons and other partners. But as I say, once we've got a resource in place, that will help. We've looked at internal governance, we started to look at internal governance, and some of our sort of frameworks for ensuring assurance on big projects have improved. We've also looked at our contract procedure rules and streamlined those and make them more sort of more effective. And in terms of one of the most important bits of work we've done is we've done a review of the member allowances in the authority. And I was hoping to take that report to board in July, but due to various reasons, including sort of members wanting a little bit more time just to sort of come to some sort of consensus about some aspects of that, it's going to be late till September, but it won't be delayed further than that. So that does have a set of recommendations in relation to member allowances, which I can talk through in a second. And then the other thing that's taking place at the moment is we're doing a review of transport in the organisation, which is probably the most difficult and complicated decision-making sort of set up at the CA, and some of it's historical because it emanates from the old transport entity. Some of it's because the CA's added in relation to that. So again, that's an area ripe for rationalisation. So we're hoping to do some work on that. We're at the moment in the process of doing some interviews in relation to that, and your transport scrutiny, sub-scrutiny will be receiving a report in relation to that. So I think that's probably sums up the work that we've been doing since sort of the review reported late last year. So it's work in progress, but certainly some significant areas of work there. Chair, would you like me just to say a few words about IRP?
Yes, please, Satish.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as member allowance is concerned, we've actually, for one reason or the other, weren't able to do a review of the member allowances, which we're expected to do in relation to the mayor and the deputy mayor. So that was delayed. So I was asked to sort of pick up that, and we put together terms of reference, which asked the independent remuneration panel to look at the allowances of the mayor and the deputy mayor in the way that were required under the legislation. We also took the opportunity to look at wider allowance issues in the CA, particularly in relation to board responsibilities as well as other responsibilities, for instance, scrutiny and ARIC and other parts of the authority. The third area that we asked the IRP to look at was the thorny issue of sort of allowances at the TDC, which have been a sort of historical anomaly and have caused some issues in the authority, and aren't really in line with what happens in the other parts of the authority. So again, the IRP has looked at all of those areas and has come up with a set of recommendations, which, as I say, will be going to board in September.
Okay, thanks for that, and I think that's a really useful scene setting for members of the committee, and particularly new members of the committee. So before I ask my questions, I'll throw it open and see if anybody else has got any questions that they'd like to ask. Yeah.
Good morning, sorry, it's not 12 o'clock yet. My name is Khurram Mahmood and I'm from the Young Combined Authority. You did refer to in your governance piece regarding the Young Combined Authority. Why is that?
Sorry, beg your pardon, I didn't catch the last bit.
Sorry, I said in your governance piece that you just set out,
yes,
you didn't mention the Young Combined Authority in terms of internal governance.
Yes, well, that's an interesting issue, because I think there's various aspects of the governance review which we do need to look at. Yeah, and it's I think it's really an issue of timing and capacity. So we've prioritised the main areas at the moment, which have been around sort of economic growth, IRP, transport governance, some internal issues as well. So, you know, YCA, as well as a raft of other areas, do need to be looked at over a period of time, but it wasn't felt at this moment in time it necessarily needed to be looked at.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Yep.
Can I ask what you're proposing to the board about member allowances for the scrutiny committee and the audit committee? Can you share?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So on the position as far as allowances is concerned at the CA is it is quite restrictive, because under the orders, strictly speaking, the CA can only make arrangements for allowances for the mayor and the deputy mayor, and that's its obligation. It's not able to allow any other allowances for board members. So that's the position in law. As far as other members are concerned, they're deemed to be co-opted members across the board in a sense, right? Because the CA is defined as those on the board as far as those members are concerned, but everybody else is a co-opted member. And the law on this says that you potentially can pay co-opted members an allowance if there's a recommendation from the IRP. So now there are some steps being taken in central government. So for instance, in the Levelling Up Bill, there will be provision through the Secretary of State to make regulations which will allow allowances to be paid to the chair of scrutiny and the members of scrutiny and the chair and members of ARIC. But that's some way down, further down the line. So when we asked our IRP to look at it, they looked at it and they did feel that both the chairs of ARAC and Scrutiny should receive an allowance pending pending the law being changed. So that's what the current recommendation relates to for Scrutiny.
Are you able to just outline for us, Satish, what a co-opted member is?
Yes, yes.
There's always been some
yes.
in my mind between a member of a committee and a co-opted member.
Yes. I think there is quite a lot of confusion about this, Chair, and I think in a normal authority, the members of the authority are those that are elected, okay? But every committee is able to add co-opted members who aren't elected. In the case of the CA board, the way the definition of members applies, it's those on the board. So it's the mayor, the deputy mayor, and those on the board, okay? So all the other members are deemed to be co-opted in law, okay? And that's the way that other authorities, for instance, West Yorkshire, treats their other members as well, co-optees, right? So that's the distinction between ordinary members and co-optees in the context of the CA board.
So in that case, then, any member who is an elected member is not a co-optee.
No. As far as the CA is, that's a position in a normal local authority, yeah? So any member who's put onto a committee who's not an elected member is a co-opted member. In relation to the CA board, the members are defined as those on the CA board. So that's the mayor, deputy, and the other members, the leaders. Everybody else, whether they're part of Scrutiny, ARAC, or TDC, or anything else, are deemed to be co-opted members.
Right, so every member of this committee then is deemed a co-opted member of the committee.
Indeed, that's the position in law.
Okay, so having clarified then that which is really helpful, the clear anomaly remains at the moment.
Yes.
You know, while we await the final report coming to the CA board in terms of the differential treatment of committees within the CA and the implications that might have for the CA in terms of governance.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think I don't think I'd be wrong in saying that there is a perceived unfairness in relation to allowances, yeah, at the CA. I think that's just the position, basically. Some of it's historical, some of it's sort of just continued in a sense. And that's why we asked the IRP to look at that, and they have taken evidence in relation to that as well as other matters.
So it is really helpful to have that IRP report, the independent report, because
Indeed.
it's a transparent view of course, pending changes that will be made in law next year.
Yeah.
So I mean, you've given us the assurance that this will definitely come to board now in September, because there's been the delay for July. So we are assured that this will come to board in September.
Yes, definitely, most definitely will be coming in September, one way or the other.
Right, okay. Thank you for that, because it is definitely very overdue. Does anybody else have any questions for him?
Do you know, in regards to, you were saying co-opted members, let's put that aside. You were saying all those who are proper members, so the 7 Mets, obviously, leaders. Does that include the non-constituency authority leaders as well? Are they proper members of the board, or are they co-opted as well? The non-constituency members, leaders?
Yes, I'm just wondering, Dan, how have they been treated in the past?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. So if we're talking about the WMCA board specifically, so it's important to be clear. We understand the meetings we're talking about. The WMCA board, the main board of the combined authority, membership is made up of constituent authorities who appoint 2 members each, non-constituent authorities who appoint 1 member each. and they are members of the Combined Authority Board. There are then a number of observer members, for example, YCA, for example, Police and Crime Commission, Fire Authority. But the short answer to your question, the membership of the WMCA board is the mayor, the constituent authorities who appoint 2 members, non-constituent authorities who appoint 1 member.
Okay, so the non-constituent authority leaders aren't co-opted, they're proper board members.
Yeah.
That's fine, thank you.
So, yes.
Thank you. No more questions for Satish? Oh, sorry, Martin.
Just on the view of this co-option situation, obviously the constituent councils appoint people to the board, and that goes to their main council, and that's confirmed. How does the authority confirm acceptance of that co-option?
He can't hear you.
Talking to you, Mike, Martin, it'll be.
Just saying that we are appointed by our local constituent authorities.
Yeah.
And that goes through main council in each of the constituency policies, so that's in the public domain. How does the WMCA board confirm our acceptance or our co-option? Is there a document somewhere?
Yes, at every annual council, which we call our annual board, which takes place in June, the nominations are received from the constituent authorities for places onto the CA entities of one form or the other, and that's the meeting that accepts them. So if you were to look at the minutes and the agenda for the last board in June, that will have all the sort of nominations and acceptance of those.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So no further questions. Thank you very much for your report, Satish, and I look forward with interest to September's meeting.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to bring in next on your agenda Claire Hatton on skills provision review. So if I can just draw your attention to the recommendations on the front, so what you're being asked to recommend today, that's to review and agree the draft scoping document for the proposed scrutiny review for 22-23 and for us to determine the membership and timescales for that review. As a background to that review, Claire will talk through just give an overview of the slide presentation that's included in your pack. But just to let members who weren't around know that this particular scrutiny review came about as a result of the scrutiny review we did into the Black Country, and one of the board recommendations was that we reviewed the skills and the skills impact and devolution of that. We'd highlighted through the Black Country review that there's a particularly low level of technical skill and managerial and professional skill within the whole of the geographic area of the Black Country. So it was felt appropriate to review that. And I think given the fact that we've got skills as a theme within the trailblazer devolution deal, it's probably a good time to be doing that as well. So I'll hand over to you, Claire.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased that I'm not going to run through all of the slides, but I did want to give a little bit of an overview. As the Chair's outlined, this has come out of discussions at the Black Country Scrutiny Review, but also it's now 3 years since the adult education budget was devolved to us. So we've had an interesting 3 years, obviously, probably not what we planned, but I think we are at a point where it's a good time to reflect on how we've been able to use skills money much better in the region to meet our ambitions, but also as we enter a period where we are being given greater funds for skills, and equally we have UK shared prosperity and multiply as additional funds coming to us, and we're making further asks in the skills arena through devolution. It's a good time, I think, to look at what we've been able to deliver and where we need to still do more and collectively understand what our skills challenges are so that we can focus the investment moving forward as well as we possibly can in the region. So I just wanted to cover a few elements with you this morning. You'll know the history of COVID and how difficult it was for the region in terms of being hard hit, exacerbating lots of the inequalities we already had. I think it's fair to say pre-COVID we were making some good inroads in both economic growth and employment in the region. However, even at that point, there were some real inequalities in terms of participation in the labour market and in terms of social and economic opportunities for some groups of our residents. Still too many low skills, still too many pockets of high unemployment, still too many people in work poverty. And whilst we are coming out of the COVID period, I think some of those challenges haven't gone away and in some cases have been exacerbated further. So whilst on the surface things look good in terms of what would be perceived to be a buoyant labour market with employment rates returning to pre-pandemic levels, inactivity in our region falling, which is different to the national picture, but partly I think because of our young population. But still too many people unemployed. Our unemployment rates are still higher than the national average. And although we've seen over the last few years some real improvements in our skill levels, particularly at level 3 in the region, we still lag behind the national average. And we are in no way at the point yet where we need to be for the demand of jobs coming into the region so that our residents can take advantage of those jobs. So I think really mixed position for us in terms of where we were, some of the progress we were making, but equally some of the challenges, as I say, that I don't think have gone away and have been probably exacerbated as well through COVID. So what I wanted to just cover with you is some of the shared challenges that we talk a lot with our local authority colleagues about, and I think these are some of the things we want to be able to unpick more through the review in terms of what our response is, what our response has been to date through skills, devolution and provision, and what more we can do to bring a laser focus to some of those issues. So low skills overall in our population, despite an improving picture, everywhere's improving. And whilst we are improving well in our region, we are still behind. We still have more residents with no qualifications at all than the national average, and we still have fewer people than the national average with that sort of magic level 3 qualification. So that's a big issue for us. Now, despite our investment through our 130 million a year adult investment, we have focused more money, a greater proportion on level 3, but we continue to make sure we focus on all of the levels that we're providing a good basic education. The amount of money we have is not making us, not enabling us to make as many inroads as we want to be able to shift the dials on that. So there is more for us to do around the skill levels in our population. We know we have a high number of our residents in jobs or sectors that are really susceptible to closure. We saw that during the pandemic, but we equally looking forward, we see that is a real challenge for us because of the adaptation of new technologies and sometimes greening. Whilst some of these things are brilliant in terms of our move to net zero, there is a risk that it impacts adversely on some of our residents, and we need to understand more how we can anticipate that, both to support firms making a just transition to green, but equally how we make sure we can support those residents. Sometimes we talk about manufacturing sector and it being an older aging workforce and think that might not be too much of an issue, but lots of those residents working in their 50s still possibly have sort of 15 to 20 years to go in the labour market, and it's incumbent on us to look at how we better prepare them for the next phase of their working life as well as some of those jobs and firms change moving forward. We're still in a position in the region where we have lower than average educational attainment on leaving school and college. So the base of the population that we work with of adults are often lagging behind. That's particularly prevalent for us when we're working with younger people in the age 19 to 24 space. Some of them are still getting to the position where a lot of young people get to at 18. That does take a substantial amount of our funds to get people to where they need to be in terms of young people as well. So again, how we can do more in that. Despite enormous amount of investment in some geographical areas, we've got some real deep-rooted and long-standing issues in certain wards all across our region. And I'll pick East Birmingham because that's one we do a lot of work in. We don't actually have an issue, particularly in getting residents to participate in learning. So when we talk about hard to reach, I'm not sure that that's actually true. And I think it's about how we move the narrative on. I think it's about underserved. So we know we can get participants to participate with us in skills training, but often we're not taking them on a journey far enough. We're doing basic level language training, for example, and we're not giving enough progression and moving those residents onto level 1, level 2 and level 3 vocational qualifications where they may start to see greater returns on productivity. So I think we've established good reach into communities, but yet we haven't seen enough progression or enough ambition, I think, through some of our skills provision for some of our communities. I've talked a little bit about young people already. We've done some good work in terms of focusing on supporting young people across a range of things, with working with partners, establishment of youth hubs. But our young people are still at a bit of a disadvantage in the labour market because of their levels of qualification. So there is a continued challenge there for us. Big challenge across the region, and I know came through in the Black Country Scrutiny review, is the low productivity that we have in many of our areas and our businesses. And whilst we have made some good inroads into widening our leadership and management training offer to SMEs, we need to do a lot more in terms of supporting those firms, those mid-level productivity SMEs across our region, to be able to increase their productivity. I think a couple of other things for us is, whilst again we've done a lot of detail work and we've been working with a lot of community organisations, and we have changed the base of the training providers that we work with across the region, there still appears to be a lack of detailed understanding on resident aspiration and how we tailor our provisions sufficiently to different resident groups. And that is particularly prevalent, I think, for us, for those residents who are already in work. We know that there are far too many people in work who are in work poverty or in insecure employment, and sometimes that's as a result of their skills. We haven't yet, I don't think, sufficiently developed a broad enough offer that is accessible for those residents to be able to take them and improve their journey. So more work to do for us there. And I think overall, despite the fact that we have made some real strides forward in sharpening the alignment of our provision to labour market opportunities and demand, we haven't yet done enough, and we still have some gaps. We still see a lack of engineering, manufacturing training provision at level 2 and 3, for example, for adults across the region. So more for us to do there. So I think that's a brief overview of the shared challenges. I wanted to just touch very briefly on the funds that we do have available moving forward, that we'll be able to look at how we tackle some of those challenges. Of course, we have our adult education budget that is devolved to us, which is 130 million a year. We now have the new national skills funding, free courses for jobs, which is targeted on level 3, which is a further 10 million a year. We have seen a lot of success in how we've brought on stream our skills boot camps, particularly in digital, and that is around 11 million a year. And we've equally in those seen quite a lot of success engaging a wide range and diverse range of participants, much more representative of our resident base than necessarily of the workforce currently in digital. So some success with new provision, with new providers and targeted provision there. And we're looking to extend our bootcamp approach to green skills as well moving forward. We've had considerable success through our Construction Gateway programme, working with employers and colleges and training providers in the region, developing a new approach to pre-employment training in construction. And we want to look to do more of that thematically with employers, so the provision is really targeted and really meets employers' needs. And then finally, we have our Community Renewal Fund, and coming on board for us, our UK Shared Prosperity and Multiply as we move forward. So that's a little bit of an overview about where we're going. So hopefully that gives a brief overview for you of some of the issues that we would like to explore through the scrutiny review. The slide pack does give you a bit of a breakdown of how those issues play out in each locality. And of course, it is different for everywhere, but there are a number of shared challenges for us.
Thanks very
Thank you,
much.
Chair.
Thanks very much, Claire. So, as I said at the start, this particular item is really about agreeing the terms of reference, the scoping document that's in your pack, and agreeing the membership. And obviously, the things to raise, the things to be concerned about are the issues that Claire has raised. Vera, you were indicating?
Yeah, it's okay, Chair. A few years ago, I was on a Combined Authority committee, and it was actually pointed out the amount of skills and training providers there actually was in, such as Walsall. And the Combined Authority was going to look at this to see if they could scale them down into right categories and get rid of, actually remove someone who wasn't needed. Did that happen?
Yes, it did. So prior to devolution, there were over 400 training providers using adult education funds to deliver across the whole of our region. When we went through our first process working with our colleges and local authorities and our first commissioning round with training providers, we moved that down to 58. We have grown slightly because of the introduction of skills boot camps, and we now have around 70 core providers working across the West Midlands, meaning that all the providers in each patch know each other. They can have meaningful relationships with officers in local authorities, and we know what's going on over the patch. So yes.
Thank you.
Supposed to be off.
Councillor McCarthy?
Right,
Mike.
Right.
Talking about Mike.
Right, okay. Just kill that. Okay, listening to what you say, we in our sort of fairly advanced society, we have a great opportunity that there could be something for everyone. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned that we don't always get people into jobs. We don't always get them to their full potential, which means that they're effectively blocking a job that might be right on the horizon of the next person down. And also the people that tend to suffer worst from this are the people who may have some kind of a label like autism or something like that. There could be very high functioning individuals in a specific niche somewhere and do a far better job than most people. I'd like to see that the scope of this covers people in those areas as well, because it's a real win-win for all of us if we get the right person, particularly someone in that area, into the right satisfying job. I wouldn't say for life, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, thank
More
you.
like
And
it's a choice.
yeah, and I think that's definitely a focus of our work moving forward. We have done some work in that area, including our Thrive Into and our Thrive at Work that supports people with a range of mental health challenges actually to progress in work, but equally supports the employer to understand that for exactly the reasons you're talking about. Some of our investments coming up, like Multiply, is about focusing on people in work with math skills that need to be improved, because it appears that's one of the skills that holds people back from taking the next job. And we are looking also at what kind of mentoring and additional support people might need to help progress their careers, their confidence internally. But it's still fledgling work for us, and it is something we need to do more on, exactly as you say.
Thank you.
Councillor Chalk?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, if I may. The first one is, have we made any definitions of skills? I'm thinking, somebody who makes a loaf of bread and does it well is a skilled person, and so is a brain surgeon, a skilled person. So there's a whole range of skills there. Are we being more specific about manufacturing skills, or are we looking at the skills across the board? I mean, particularly again, in construction at the moment, we can't get carpenters and bricklayers for love and the money. So have we looked at that? And another comment after that, or maybe, Chair.
Yes, we do look at that. As a lot of the measurement is still done in terms of qualifications, but I think exactly as you're saying is what we've done through construction to try and look at skills in response to labour market. We have looked at shorter courses designed with employers to give people the essential skills they need to be functional on site, whether that means they gain a qualification or not. Often they gain, in that circumstance, a CSCS card accreditation. But you're right, skills are much broader than just qualifications. The metrics now nationally that we look at our qualifications, but we've taken a much broader view in terms of how we've used our funding.
If I may, Chair, the other thing is, when I worked in Birmingham as a teacher, there was a primary school, I think it was under Spaghetti Junction, where the pupils were at least a year or in some cases 2 years behind academically because of the lead in the air at the time. Do we ever look at the environmental impact on people, on individuals or on groups of people as to why they aren't achieving what they could achieve?
Probably not to the level of detail you are talking about. I mean, schools provision doesn't fit within the CA remit. That's obviously with local authorities, and we would work in partnership. CA has launched a race equalities task force, and the next commission that the CA is scheduled to launch is a Life Chances Commission that was set out in the Mayor's manifesto, and that's to pick up exactly some of those factors you're talking about, some of those wider factors that impact on people's life chances. That work hasn't kicked off yet, but it is something that is on the horizon for us.
Thank you.
Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Claire. I've got two questions. Short one to start off with. You mentioned SMEs, so I just wanted to ask you whether the business community will be involved in this review. So that short question. The next one, it's just balancing in terms of, I guess, what we're seeking, what we're seeking to achieve through skills and adult education. From a long-term perspective, we've heard earlier around the trailblazer deal and all the ambitions that we want to seek through devolution. So just having that lens with this review of what we seek on a long-term basis, but also will the review acknowledge short-term challenges? So, for example, a very tight labour market, cost of living crisis. We're seeing very skilled people, for example, care staff who are going into retail and hospitality. So, and potentially dropping out of education because of immediate financial pressures. So just seeking your views on will those aspects be picked up in the review? Thank you.
Certainly the short-term and long-term challenge is something we want to look at, and that's why we were particularly talking about trying to look at, always difficult to forecast labour market changes, isn't it? But there are some trends that we know will happen, particularly around aspects of greening, aspects of digitisation, and those have been talked about for a while, but I think it's seeking to try and be a little bit more precise on what that impact is for our residents. So yes, absolutely. On business communities, hadn't actually included that in the scope, but we can do, very much linked to the review of business support. I think that's already been undertaken by the LEPs and the local authorities in terms of feeding in what those issues are for the business community, but we can certainly pick that up as well.
I think one of the things that we usually do in these reviews is invite external witnesses in to give expert evidence. So I would say that would be really beneficial to look for experts within that community to be invited in. I've got Councillor Kettle indicating, and then I'm going to tie up this item. Oh, sorry. Right, Councillor Kettle and yourself, Andrew, and then I'm going to tie the item up because of time.
On page 24, I think it is, the annex of adult education, investment in local authority split, Obviously, we see at the bottom that out of 133 million, Birmingham takes 67 million, nearly 51% of the total, where Solihull only has something like 3.7, which is an incredible underinvestment in adult education. And really, anyone below 10% isn't getting their fair share. So when we look at our labour force and the way it performs, fundamentally, if our education system is undervalued and underfunded, especially to this degree of distortion, how on earth can we ever accept a levelling up will ever take place?
Yep. I think just in response to that, when we received the adult education budget in the first year, the board decisions were that each area should continue to receive as a minimum the same share that it had received prior to devolution. And you're right, that means that Birmingham's share is quite significant, obviously bigger population, but the formula for adult education investment has never been done on a needs basis. It has been done on a historic investment basis. But if that's something committee would like us to look at through this review, then more than happy to do that.
Well, we're talking about a 25% benefit, at least, for Birmingham compared to the rest. And when you see the abysmal level lower down, it's all right giving us reports time and time again that we are under par in certain areas of the Black Country and other authorities around the West Midlands. But if we've got such a distortion like that on our education budget, how on earth can we ever make up? And if we accept the historical precedents, we aren't going to change anything. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're right. I wouldn't dream of telling you you're wrong. But I think absolutely, we can certainly pick that up within the scoping documents to make sure that we have a focus on that through the review in terms of the allocation and the formula for that allocation. So I think we can absolutely include that. I've got Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Chair. My background is in construction and manufacturing. Both started off with a level 7 qualification, and when that became untenable, I went and got myself a level 2. In reading the papers, and you just mentioned it again, you talked about the magic level 3. Now, the magic level 2 includes training for plumbers, brickies, plasterers. Now, there are probably other trades, but that's not my area of expertise. And when I decided to become a plumber at the age of 56, what I did was a level 2 City and Guilds, and I bolted on a Part P electrical certification. That was still level 2, not level 3. I was then gainfully employed for another 8 or 9 years. I think we need to be very careful, particularly in the West Midlands, at making that distinction. Now, if I want an electrician, I'd probably want a level 3 electrician because they do the diagnosis, but you need to be very careful in that group. Aluminium fabricators, level 2, and we were short of fabricators. Installers, level 2. I think, particularly in a region which is manufacturing and construction orientated, I think we need to be a little more subtle. I can't see much call for somebody who's got a level 7 qualification because they did a master's in the spread of Latin in Judea in the 2nd century AD. I just hope that you can build that in to get that level of analysis and sophistication. Because I think young people particularly, we need to get them into the industries, whatever they are. And that brings me to my second point, which is really around the career service, which I believe the authority has now got some overarching delivery on. I would like to see some review of how effective that is at getting our young people to do something that's useful in vocational terms and getting them the skills at school that get them into jobs as opposed to things that might be nice to do. The number of students I come across who are doing criminology is unbelievable. And I don't know that anybody who employs people with degrees in criminology, certainly not in the West Midlands. And that would be a level 6 qualification. And this region is screaming for skills at the lower levels, plus high-level engineering skills, is my impression. So I hope that lot can somehow get into your terms of reference, please.
So not too much there, but absolutely on the levels, and that's probably I've probably oversimplified because we're absolutely aware of the points you're making on that. On careers, we don't currently have any responsibility for the careers delivery in the region. There has been some work with the careers and enterprise company through LEPs and local authorities to date, but National Career Service and the direction is very much at the moment still set nationally by government. It is one of the asks through the devolution deal to have greater accountability and responsibility for that, because recognise lots of the points you're saying in there. So I'm not sure how far we would be able to go on a review of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very final point from Councillor Sutherland, because I'm very aware of time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Mike Sutherland. Hello, Julie Claire. I'm from Cannock Chase District Council. It's my first meeting here. Just an observation in this report, and you might quite well say to me, well, it's not designed for that. What I'm not picking out is what's working and what's not. I've got a lot of what's not. And for me, it's about a start point. And I really don't get a sense of direction. Every area is different. Money's coming in, and one of my colleagues mentioned it earlier. The allocation seems to me, again, naively, I'm going to say this, haphazard. How focused is it? We've got free courses for jobs. Now, is there an opportunity to take something and really drill down to see what you can do with that? Because, and again, I hope you don't think I'm being naive. I do have a bit of past experience, but we just seem to be pumping money in and processing money rather than looking at outcomes and understanding outcomes. What's working, what's not working. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, noted, and we can absolutely bring more of that analysis into the review. You're correct in that it isn't in there. We have had quite focus on outcomes. Actually, we've changed a lot of our narrative in terms of the way we work with our providers, and particularly our FE colleges, about understanding outcomes rather than just measuring numbers of qualifications, for example. But yeah, that needs to be drawn out more fully.
Okay, thanks very much for the questions and for your presentation, Claire. So in terms of the draft scoping document, I think we would want to include and pick up some of the comments and points mentioned in today's meeting. So I'd suggest if you can bring that back for September, just as we just have another look at the scoping document without any additional presentation, just to make sure that we're happy with what's in the scoping document. What I am going to look for from today's meeting is some volunteers to sit on that skills review. Now, I'm suggesting that because of the workload that we've got over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, I'm suggesting that we look to do this perhaps October time with a view to reporting back for the January board. Now, the way we've done it in the past, it's been 3 or 4 members. Any more than that, it gets really difficult to work out on diary time. Sometimes, you know, how many days it would be over, I don't think we know yet, but very often if we're going to call expert witnesses in, there might be 2 or 3 day commitment overall to this particular piece of work. So what I'm looking for is a geographical spread of volunteers as well as a political spread of volunteer. So if anybody's got a burning interest to sit on this particular review group, if you can indicate, please. Right, so, okay. Okay. You got there first, did you?
Yeah,
I think we'd only want one. So I mean, if you want to decide between you which one, that's absolutely fine. I am aware
Do you want somebody across the bottom of the area?
Well, we've got 4 volunteers, and we're in danger then of getting to the point where it becomes really difficult and unwieldy in terms of getting diary time together. But I mean, what will happen is that this report will come back to this board before it goes on to the January CA board anyway. So everybody will have a chance to have oversight of that again. Okay, thank you very much for your volunteering. And if we move swiftly on to Kate's update on our grant register.
Chair. So for new members of the committee, this is a standing item that you will see at each meeting on there. It is a list of live grants, so it's not an exhaustive list of every grant that the Combined Authority has ever won since it was in its inception. So it is the grants that are currently being managed. So things will drop off and things will come on there. In part, it kind of illustrates the point actually that Ed was talking about earlier about simplification of funding, in that it looks quite bitty in terms of how we get some of the money in on there. The last update was in March. We've had a number of grants that have come in since there, particularly within the transport arena. So we've had just over 30 million for the Zero Emissions Bus Regional Area Scheme, awarded to deliver 124 hydrogen buses and infrastructure for the region. Active Travel Fund Tranche 3, so that's the third tranche of funding we've had to support cycling and walking schemes around the region also. Technical boot camps, which will have factored into the discussion that Claire's just had on there, and also social decarbonisation funds. So I talked around some of the money that we've had for retrofit and actually gaining some traction in that area as well around retrofitting, particularly social housing, to make them more efficient for people in there. I won't labour on a lot of the other items you probably will have seen before. For there, and obviously some grants have come off because some have ended. Some of the COVID grants that we've had previously are no longer coming through to either local authorities or MCAs. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, so I'll open it up to brief questions from the committee. No, I've just got one on the Active Travel Tranche 3. So going back to Tranche 1, there was a big emphasis on local authorities putting together their active travel plans, putting them into yourselves, and then a combined submission went in. Is that the way this is working, and what's the time frame for it?
It absolutely was. So the original bid that was put into government was done in conjunction with local authorities, so very much involved with local authorities to put schemes forward for that. We put a bid into government which was higher than the 7, I think it was around 30 million bid that we put in. There was a lot of back and forth with government about schemes that were in there, and local authorities have been engaged at all that point, the point where we put the list back to say we could deliver the 17.25 million, again in conversation with local authority officers that they felt those schemes were still in line with their objectives and still deliverable for that. So it's, yes, very much in conjunction.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions they want to raise? Kate? Yeah.
I noticed there's some air quality grants, particularly for upgrading buses in Birmingham. Do those issues not also exist in many of our other centres, be it a smaller number of routes?
They do, and ultimately our plan around decarbonisation of the fleet looks at the full regional area. Sometimes it's where we can actually bid in. It might be that the money that we're bidding into is particularly in certain areas that we get into all that. So we recognise that it's not just Birmingham or not just Coventry, for example, that needs that. It is for the entire area, but sometimes we are limited by the pots of money that we can get into.
Is it possible that we could take that forward into the transport sub perhaps as a...
Yeah, and I think it'll also be picked up in terms of the trailblazer deal. So I think that was one of the points Ed made very strongly, that the way funding has been allocated, where it's been quite prescriptive, actually if they would allocate the whole pot to us for us to deliver in a period of time and then report back, that makes it much easier for the Combined Authority to deliver where it needs to be. So I think so the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee, it's about sort of endorsing that approach, I think. Anything from anybody else? No? Okay, so we take the minutes now. I'm reliant, I think, on Councillor Waters and Councillor McCarthy, because I think you'll be, or Councillor Kettle maybe, for the minutes of the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee.
Okay.
For just to tell me whether or not they're a true and accurate reflection. Yeah. Yeah, lovely. So they will be, they're formally approved then. And then we move on to the work programme, which is really for noting, that's in your pack. You will note that we have the Mayor's Question Time policy meeting on the 20th of October and the budget meeting in December. As in previous years, we will be looking to hold workshops prior to both of those, just to help members formulate their questions around the various issues for those meetings. They can be done via Teams or a hybrid arrangement, so hopefully that will make it a little bit more flexible for people. And then finally, the date of the next meeting is Monday the 5th of September, which will be here at 10 AM. And just a reminder that people can claim their travel expenses for this particular meeting. Thank you.
From the authority or from your appointing authority?
From the, sorry.
Yeah, from the Combined Authority. What I'll do for all members or through Lindsay is send us a claim form to fill in. But, we'll send a copy around to everyone, but you submit them to Lindsay and then they're processed through the Combined Authority.
Okay. Thanks everybody for your attendance, and you finished bang on time to the minute. So well done everyone. Thank you.
It's having a good chair. What does it?
Oh,